Hey, what's up, folks? This is an episode 54, Spun Today Podcast Extra. It's basically something that resonated with me that I didn't mention when recording episode 54 of the podcast, so I just wanted to mention it here. It has to do with wrongful convictions and how they can happen to anyone, people from all walks of life. I think that some of us have a propensity to assume that these wrongfully convicted folks must have done something wrong enough to even be within the realm of possibility for being convicted of the crimes that they're wrongfully convicted of, but that's not the case. And it's not the case, at least in the episodes that I've been listening in on and accounts that I've been hearing and reading of. And I'm going to give you guys two examples. First of which is Julie Ballmer, which wound up serving 7 years in prison for first-degree child abuse. Now, long story short, Julie adopted her biological nephew because her sister was a crackhead and was unfit and unwilling to take care of the baby. She takes the baby in, and about 6 weeks later winds up calling a doctor because the baby doesn't want to eat. And the doctor instructs her to take the baby to an emergency room because they don't want the baby to dehydrate. She does that, and the baby winds up getting admitted into the hospital and spending like around 30-something hours in the hospital. Long story short, Julie gets accused of... the baby winds up having a fractured skull and swollen brain, and Julie gets accused for first-degree child abuse. They said it came from shaking the baby. And later, they find out, 7 years later, they find out that the baby actually had a stroke, and the stroke caused swelling of the brain, which in turn caused the fracture in the skull. And they found that out 7 years later. You know, she was in prison for 7 years for something like a horrendous crime like that, right? Which is horrible. And also, by their own admission, the hospital stated that the shaking of the baby happened like 15 hours prior or something like that. Meanwhile, the baby was in the hospital for like 30 hours, and she didn't even have the baby with her when that happened. During that time frame, rather. So that's one example. The second example is Fernando Benitez, who wound up serving 18 years in prison. 18. For a homicide that he did not commit. Long story short on this one, Fernando, by his own admission, stated that he wasn't a great kid. You know, he was in and out of trouble. He got into multiple fights and I think like shoplifting when he was younger and graffiti, like kid shit like that. And he was in the precinct's database in terms of having a mugshot from when he was like 14 or 15 years old. And this crime, or this homicide, happened when he was 22. Now, there was an eyewitness that saw the crime, saw the homicide occur, and she, or he, I think it was a she, wound up picking Fernando's mugshot from this historical book of mugshots that for some reason the precinct gave her to look up who killed the guy. And she picked out Fernando's picture, a picture of a 14-year-old kid. Meanwhile, you know, he's 22 present day when the crime was committed. And she said that's the guy that did it. So from a cop's point of view, open shut case. We have an eyewitness. They point to this picture. This picture matches this name. This name matches this address. Let's go pick up the guy that did it. And because of that testimony, which was later recanted 18 years later, they arrested him and he spent 18 years in prison, which is insane to me. Meanwhile, he also had like ironclad multiple alibis. He was with his brother and a couple friends, and they were in Washington Heights, and this at the time that this occurred, and this occurred in like Lower Manhattan somewhere. And it's just horrible. It's it really can happen to anyone, and that's something that multiple of the cases that I've been looking into, it's something that they have said as well. Anyway, if you guys want to listen to the full episode 54 of the Spun Today podcast, check it out on any and all of your favorite podcatchers, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Google Play, all that good stuff. Thanks.